Hello guys, and I think that today it is going to be one of the most interesting and at the same time personal videos on this channel so far, because I will tell you a little bit more about my childhood memories connected with the monstrous Soviet Union. I don't hide my age, you know that. I was born in 1984, and that is 7 years before the collapse of the USSR. And all the memories that I have are definitely connected with some child life, but I actually believe this makes them even more precious because through that focus you can notice some details that in those serious history books may remain unnoticed. This topic has become particularly interesting as more and more of the Russian officials, Kremlin officials, keep repeating that the project of the Soviet Union is not dead and it can be revived. Of course, it cannot, because no one sane from the former Soviet republics, which were actually occupied by the communist regimes, want back. Nobody wants that, neither in Ukraine, nor in Lithuania, nor in Moldova. We are fighting against that, and I do have some evidence why life in the Soviet Union was not good. So please remember that the things I will share were fixed by the memory of the 4 or 5-year-old child. So the things will have this, atmosphere. First of all, I remember really long queues in which you have to stand with your mother, with your grandmother for hours. And I'm not exaggerating here. It could take 2 hours to get just one pack of butter. Also, I remember very empty shelves in the shops. Not like during COVID times. It was worse because the shops continued working, you could enter them, and in Soviet Union you did not have supermarkets, you did not have big grocery stores, especially in the regional cities like mine. They would have some specialized vegetable shops, bread shops, and you enter the shop and there is only a shop assistant in it and no bread or no vegetables. Or, for example, out of 12, 20 vegetables that you are supposed to find in a shop, you will see just one, for example, beetroot, and huge queues to get it. Of course, in the villages, people kept growing these products by themselves, but in total, it was really difficult to find some specific product, and the moments they were on the shelves, they disappeared really quickly. People were super aggressive in the queues. No matter how intelligent you are, no matter how well-bred you are, if you want to buy a chicken and you did not eat chicken for 2-3 months and you want to cook it for your children, trust me, you become a fighter. And that is what Soviet Union, poor economy, this lack of private property led millions of people to. Plus, all the good products were often taken to, I think you can guess, Moscow and St. Petersburg. Traditionally, as now, the Kremlin only cares about the moods and attitudes of people in those big cities because they are close to the Kremlin. Their words, their reactions can somehow destroy those who are in the government. So it was just the same during the Soviet times, and I do have this memory of a very frosty, snowy winter. I don't know why it was like that, just like you watch that ugly Russian movies, and me standing in a fox fur coat with my mom holding her hand and waiting to get some butter. It was not interesting to stand in a queue. I was not into butter, but that's a part of life, and people spent hours during a week in queues. I think this is part of the thing that brought up this it's not patience, it's like misery, obedience in the Russians. So, and empty shelves, very typical. So lots of products that were typical for you, that were not a surprise for your children, for people of my age, were a real present for me. And I do have this story about green bananas. I've shared it from time to time on my main channel in my memories. But I do remember how before one new year, my parents bought perhaps the first or the second in my life bananas to give me as a present. And they were green because once again in Soviet Union you did not have a lot of products, and for them to travel to the Soviet Union then to spend some time hidden behind the shelves, because another reason was these like bribes that you have to pay to shop assistants so they keep some products for you and you don't have to fight in a queue. So trust me, Soviet Union, Moscow is the mother of corruption. In Eastern Europe, and from what I see in Western Europe too. So they got those green bananas and they hid them somewhere in the flat. But I could smell them. I could catch that aroma. And I was trying to find them like, this little dog looking everywhere. And I finally found them under the bed. They like darkness. And just think about in the 90s, like, okay, in 89, in 90s, a child is looking for green bananas as something very great. And it's not a trauma, it's my peculiarity now. I love green bananas. When I go to the supermarket, and now in times of the big war, we still have everything we need. You can actually check the video on this channel about food situation in Ukraine. And I choose green bananas. And I see there are some people who do that too, because why not? If I prefer their taste, they are a little bit sour. I like it. So bananas were a really good present. But talking about other fruit and vegetables, I don't remember the Chernobyl disaster from the news. I was like 2. And I do remember stories of my mom, how worried she was to learn what happened, but that was in the beginning of May. For more than a week, Soviet government hid this information, thus exposing a lot of people. And I live not that far away from Chernobyl. It's a couple of 100 kilometers, and parts of my region were considered a dangerous zone in the forests, not Lutsk city, but anyway. And my mom, people heard rumors, people knew something was happening. So she decided we will stay in. She will not take me for walks, like they take in strollers. But she remembered conversation with my grandfather, who kept saying, no, these are rumors, these are lies, these are Western propaganda, because yes, he was under that Soviet spell. And if something bad happened, the government would have informed us. Imagine how he felt a week later when he learned it really happened. But once again, I don't have a lot of this news memories and so on, but throughout my childhood, I guess up to my teenage years, and already in the independent Ukraine, this Soviet heritage of radiation, we had to be very careful with the vegetables that we eat, because it's plants that absorb a lot of radiation. And there were districts, and actually still districts in my area, from which you prefer not to buy berries or mushrooms. And you had to be very careful with, various products that absorb radiation. And in the newspapers, you could read information that these products are more susceptible to radioactive elements. And also many vegetables started growing big and you never buy it. And until now, I never buy products like that, even though I know they are safe. Maybe that's just the kind of a potato, but I will never choose it. And you had to, for example, put them in water or add something. There were a lot of charlatans, by the way, who provided advice how to avoid radiation. So also this attention to where the products are, what do you do with them? People also hid from the rains for a very long period of time, because you never knew where was this rain traveling from. And all this tragedy was brought by this dying Soviet empire, by the negligence. And what I personally blame more is this desire to hide the truth. Okay, the disaster, the catastrophe happened, but why don't you inform millions of people who can save their health, who can save their life by simply knowing what to do? So that was a serious problem. Also, clothes. They were all the same. I mean, literally every child would wear something similar. It reminds me North Korea, and it was my childhood years too. And I have a funny story that I will share with you. I had that faux fur coat, artificial fur coat. It was brown, and like a lot of children around me had the same. And we were visiting one party, like big party for kids, like New Year evening, New Year morning, something like that. And mom took my fur coat from the wardrobe, put it on me. We were going back home. Then I put my hand into the pocket and realized it's not my coat. And they looked identical. We rushed back to the wardrobe. My mom was all red because, she was always very kind, very polite, and she felt like we have just stolen someone's coat. So we returned it back, and since then she decorated mine with some red beads on my belt, and I could easily recognize it. But the reality, that is just not the uniform for school. That is nothing different that you can get in a shop. One of the best memories from this early years, from the 1990, was my dad returning back home from a business trip to Moscow. And he spent hours in a queue to get to the first McDonald's that opened there, still in times of the Soviet Union. And he wanted to try it. It was very interesting for him. But that was my dad. I had the best dad in the world, and I do not exaggerate. He invested a lot, and lots of my dreams and plans are his, and not just in a bad way. Just he made me believe I can do a lot, and I live by his thoughts, by his belief in me. So he brought from McDonald's all these papers. This may sound funny to you, but he brought this Coca-Cola paper glass, a straw, a number of straws. Perhaps he stole some, I don't know, napkins with McDonald's, and even that paper bag in which you put potatoes. Fried potatoes, French fries. And there is a period in life of kids when they don't eat a lot, and that was mine 4 or 5 years. And he started frying potatoes and putting that in McDonald's paper bag. And he also gave me a compote, something ordinary, or maybe some Soviet gas water. And he would put it into that Coca-Cola glass. And I felt so cool because I had access to something different, and even in my 5 years, I knew that's true. That is why I'm a huge fan of McDonald's. I don't say they have the best food in the world, but for me, they are a symbol of this world, Western civilization. Once again, maybe not the best, but trust me, you have not experienced what Soviet Union is. And I am very grateful that during the times of war, McDonald's stays in Ukraine, and McDonald's opens new restaurants. That is really cool. Also, I remember my grandmother. I did not go to the kindergarten. My parents took care of me, and my grandparents were involved a lot. That's typical for Ukrainian families. And I remember that she often took me for a walk with a radio. She would carry this radio with antenna and constantly listen to parliament because now I realize these were the moments when the Soviet Union was collapsing, and they were actually discussing, they were quarreling. It was always so emotional, and she carried it. We were walking, we were talking, we were watching, but she was close to that information. And I think that is actually very interesting because I also remember those sounds, I remember those emotions, I remember that uncertainty, how people hoped for a change, but how people were afraid of the change because, come on, it lasted for decades and decades and decades. And now I realize that grandma was carrying that information with us. So we may say this is also just like social media. It's not new that you carry it with you everywhere you go if you care. And I remember when I started this channel, one of the first unusual questions that I received was, do you speak Soviet? And at first I felt like there is no Soviet language. Well, Russian was dominating. Moscow did everything to Russify cultures, to destroy their languages, to not let them practice. It was at the universities only Russian, at schools only Russians, books translated into Russian. If you want career, you have to speak Russian, and so forth. So to some extent, Russian was a Soviet language. But then I've realized we can also answer this question in a metaphorical way by thinking that speaking Soviet, thinking Soviet is a specific way of understanding the world. And that is how Russians still live. Maybe you have heard Sovok, that is a shortened slang way to describe that Soviet Union, Sovok. And there is also a term that people often speak about in jokes and anecdotes, Homo Sovieticus. Just like Homo sapiens, Homo Sovieticus is a kind of person that is intoxicated by the myth, by the propaganda. And we see that, for example, Putin is definitely a Homo Sovieticus who believes that prison of people, that destruction of private property, disrespect to individuality was a good project. And what is bad, this heritage, what would be the correct word instead of heritage? This curse of the Soviet Union is still with us to some extent. There are lots of people traumatized by it. There are lots of people who do not know how to react in particular situations. A very typical thing, you compliment a woman who lived a long life in the Soviet Union about something, and she will not say, thank you. She will not say, oh, I'm glad that you like my earrings. I like them too. I like accessories. I like that. No, a typical way is just like to ask to forgive for having something good. And in 100 cases, people will say, these are really cheap. These are bad. Whoa, I was in a hurry. I don't think. Or if you like my skirt or something, people start saying something bad about the object you compliment, even about themselves, just like asking for an excuse for being good, for being successful, for being rich, for being smart, because it was not what Soviet Union wanted its citizens to be. And if you became too bright, too clever, too interesting, too fashionable, you could end up in prison in Siberia, or even worse. And unfortunately, a lot of people are still traumatized by that. A lot of people are not prepared to defend and protect themselves. This is what we witness inside Russia. They do not believe they can take responsibility. They are worth something. This disrespect to private property, in Ukraine, why actually they organized Holodomor, we had a very strong middle class, and that middle class had fields, horses, pigs. It was not something big, but it was a normal farm, for example, and people protected it. And when you protect your house, when you protect your farm, it somehow develops this feeling of love and care, and you start protecting your street, your city, your country. That is what you witness in Ukraine. And by destroying the very concept of private property, what Soviet Union did, what communists did, you make it very wrong, like nothing belongs to anyone. It's not just like you have everything. No, you have nothing. And if you have nothing, you don't care about anything. You don't care about the broken doors in your porch. You don't care about dirt on the streets. And you become what we see right now in the neighboring country that keeps destroying us just because it cannot repair anything inside of it. So, I will be happy to answer questions in the comments. Let me know if you like this kind of videos because it was really interesting for me to share these memories. If you want to know something more, feel free to ask me because I believe you still do not know a lot about my part of the world. First hidden behind the Iron Curtain and then hidden in the smokes of Soviet and Russian propaganda. And I'm here very open and very grateful for the possibility to tell you more, even if it is from this little child perspective, but I believe it tells a lot about these dying days of the Soviet Union, and it actually all began with the collapse of the economy. Hopefully this time Russian economy will also destroy the monstrous federation. Remember to subscribe, this means a lot to me. Please share these videos if you share my opinion. Also subscribe to my social media. And thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channel. This gives an opportunity to film more videos and tell more stories. And I hope you like them. Slava Ukraini!